Gentlemen.
Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live. Darth Anonymous coming to you from Terra Prime headquarters. This is our weekly webcast on all things sabering. Tonight we're going to be talking about two things, form and style. Two things that are kind of a semantic argument. We'll go into all the different types of meanings of that. So joining us on the panel tonight, we've got Eric. How are you doing, Eric? Good? Okay. All right, and Gary. How's it going, Gary? Count Arcanus.
I'm doing very well, thank you, Master. Yourself?
Very, very good. And from our outpost in Glee Anselm, we've got Vornak, who is probably still doing something around there. He should be returning momentarily. Okay. Somebody's computer just froze. Okay, so we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties in certain areas, so bear with us here. So hey, Vornak, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. It's warm and, well, the sun is setting, but sunny, and there's waves crashing on the beach, so I really have nothing to complain about.
Excellent. Yes, I don't think you do. Anyway, okay. All right, so we'll get to it now. Form and style. Obviously, these are two terms which are going to come up with you're going to have a whole bunch of different definitions depending on where you're coming from. When we're talking about martial arts, we're talking about certain definitions of it. When we're talking about fiction and all that kind of thing, we're going to be talking about versions of what's in martial arts and kind of representations of it. So hopefully we'll be able to get some good discussion going on those. So I guess the first big question is, what is the difference between form and style? And the answer to that is not always clear. So we can take it from a bunch of different ways, and we'll kind of go by them comparatively here at first. So on one hand, we have a kind of dichotomy between form, which seems, in its definition and everything like that, more static, more kind of together, and we have style, which seems more personal, more unique, varied, depending on who's doing things. The idea that form and style kind of comprise two different aspects of the same thing, I think, is well founded. One way we can think about it is if we're talking about sabering, we have forms, and let's talk about actually even just the lightsaber itself. Okay, it has a particular form, meaning it has certain pieces which are common to almost all of them, which identify it as a lightsaber when it's sitting next to other things. And these, of course, are the hilt, the blade, the color of the blade, the fact that it lines up, all of that kind of thing. So that would be the form of the lightsaber. The style, of course, can vary depending on whose it is, who built it, who made it, who bought it, whatever. And the blade can change color, it can change length, the pommel, the hilt, all of this stuff can change in almost an infinite number of ways, and that would be kind of what we call style. And it's a good analogy for kind of like the martial art part of this stuff, which is form going to be more of the things that are common amongst the practice of it, and the style being more the personal expressions of that. It can also mean, if we take form in the sense of styles of martial art or what have you, a form can be a group of techniques which is put together, right? And that's where we start getting into, well, is that a form or is it a style? Because if we group enough techniques together into a particular form, we end up calling it a style because it takes on unique perspective. It takes on unique looks, and we can identify it in a lineup of other things. So that would be kind of where I'm entering it. Why don't I go ahead and open it up to the panel here? Anybody have anything to mention or to add to that?
Yeah, I'll sort of jump in on that because I think obviously I was making a few notes before the show, and I think it's something you said really sort of rung true with me, that it's a lot of it is down to how you sort of define the two terms. And from a martial arts point of view, you hear certainly the word style bandied around an awful lot. I mean, it's like, in a way, it's like almost the old sort of Chinese kung fu movies, and everyone has a different style that they learned from their school or from their master or whatever it was. Whereas forms tended to be kind of sort of demonstrated as being particular sets of moves that you would practice. So I think it's a lot of it with these two things comes down to, as you were saying, is how you really define them. And I mean, obviously that's something we can kind of get into later as to what the actual definitions are, and maybe even how I think they've perhaps changed, and everyone has their own sort of version of those definitions as well.
Yeah, you can. There's obviously variations of the way it's used. I don't think there's any really change in definition, other than the fact that the words are going to be used in entirely different ways and to entirely different contexts. So I can say to another martial artist, this guy who's doing Hungar style, he had a really, really cool style. And although it sounds redundant and a little goofy, it still makes sense. I use the same word in the same sentence, but it means two different things. And to people who are kind of into it, they would go, oh, okay. I mean, we don't say it that way because, as I said, it's a little redundant, But yeah, I mean, and it's going to depend on who you are, and obviously all words are going to change the definition, a little bit. That's one thing that's always going to happen. But what's really going to be important as we go through this here is context. What context are we saying these things? Like if I say I like his style, okay, well that's really personal. I'm singling out an individual. That person is unique. I like his style, all right? If I say I like that style, well, that means an entirely different thing. It means a kind of group of stuff. Now, you could make an argument to define that as form, because what I'm doing is I'm looking at the form of this particular thing and lumping it in altogether as a style. But yeah, so that's the definitions there. I think the contexts are going to be definitely where we're going to be leaning. All right, Vornak, do you want to add anything? Is he there? Maybe not. Okay, well, we'll let him jump in when he can. Eric, do you have anything to add?
Sorry about that. Dealing with the funky computer here. No, I'm just kind of following along right now. Everything, yeah, everything that I could have said has already been said, basically. All of my ideas have pretty much been covered so far. Yeah.
Good. Excellent.
Hello? Can you hear me?
There you are. I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. Somehow I got muted. No, I've been listening all along, and I was going to say you set the stage very well. It's this conversation context is going to be very important because there's form and style can have somewhat varying definitions based on where you're using them, and sometimes they can even overlap. So I think it's been laid out pretty well for the sake of our conversation how we want to use them.
Good. Okay. Well, I think the first thing we're going to probably delve into is the idea that the idea of the form, right? We have the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, and when we say form in that context, it's not being used in exactly the same way, because it wasn't used by martial arts. It was kind of adopted from martial arts, and that's what I kind of alluded to earlier, saying that it's more of a amalgam of what is the reality of how those terms are used. And so when we say the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, many people would consider the 7 forms styles, right? And the way they're kind of portrayed on Wikipedia and from what I hear in many of the books and comic books is that they are styles. We, of course, have taken a little bit different approach to our interpretation of them. And one of the reasons is because of the terminology kind of being a little bit imprecise. So we say formula, right? And we can use form for short. But what we mean is formula, meaning this is a kind of mathematical equation, and it really means form. Like, this is a technique. It's going to have many various styles, and that's what we're going for. The forms, the 7 forms of lightsaber combat, as they're talked about, represent definitely. They're supposed to represent these styles that you can be schooled in one or the other, right? And even though that they have a progression because they all evolved from each other, these time periods were ridiculously long, so it's probably what have you. But yeah, so I mean that would probably be one of the major points of contention. Joining us here is Chris. How you doing, Chris?
Doing okay.
All right. Yes, our equipment is all failing. We must have sunspots or something. Oh, there is a meteor shower tonight. So yeah. Okay. Anyway, yes. So why don't we kind of talk about that? Because obviously some people have come with pre-existing ideas of what these forms are going to be and everything like that, and how we've approached them is a little bit different. But why don't I add? Yeah, I'll just open up here to the panel. What did the form? What did the 7 forms mean to you? You know, and still mean to you, kind of in that kind of fictional context. And then we can talk about how that kind of relates to what we're doing for real. So I'll just open it up to anybody who wants to go.
Well, it probably won't be any surprise. I've been in line with the TPLA idea that the forms are all part of the same structure, and each of the forms is kind of the I'm completely lost for words now. I had great ideas and they're now stuck in the back of my brain.
Yes.
Each of the 7 forms is the kind of the foundational structure for a part of the overall lightsaber combat. So each form, kind of like what you talked about early on in the show, was each form is kind of the foundational structure. If we're going to start using style when we're talking about it, each person is going to have their own style of doing it, because each person is going to have their own slight or significant different interpretation.
Yes, absolutely. And then, interpretation is based on lots and lots of things like body type and physical ability and athleticism and personal taste and imagination and creativity, space, all of that kind of thing. So, all right. Any of you guys?
Yeah, I can. I guess when talking about the 7 forms, I always pictured it in my mind that it was a progression that one could go through, sort of, I guess, just like grades in school, I guess, and where most people were kind of happy at Form 5 or Form 6 maybe. Only the dangerous went up to Form 7 and got away with it kind of thing. So, in terms of the fictional Star Wars, I always saw it as lightsaber grades, if you will. It kind of kept building on what was the foundation of Shicho until you have the elaborate dance, and somebody's style, I guess, will be able to put all 7 forms together and just obliterate anybody who comes their way with relative ease. So that's what I always thought it was. Are we talking about what it means to TPLA now, or are we going to do that later?
No, we can talk about that in a little bit. But
okay, cool. I'll reserve my comment for then.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Somebody maybe who was into the EU, or I know Gary was. Chris, are you into that expanded universe? No. Yeah. I'm right there with you.
We have the comic books, but that's about it for expanded universe.
Okay.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll sort of jump in a little bit there. I mean, I guess perhaps because I'm very, very new to this. I mean, I've only been with TPLA just about coming up a year, and this is the only sort of weapons experience I've had. For me, they still feel a little bit kind of separate in a way. The 7 forms. It's almost like they're kind of ways of solving certain problems, which the problems themselves could may well be universal in the sense of, well, how do you defend yourself against X, Y, and Z? And each of the forms has its own particular sort of way of dealing with that. So to my sort of mind, it is kind of different ways of problem solving those things. But obviously, when you get up to a higher level, which I'm not at yet, you start to be able to combine those methods, and that's where for me the thing sort of takes on in a sense a kind of a greater whole, is that the ability to combine maybe elements of Form 2, elements of Form 3, whatever it is. From an EU point of view, you do definitely get. They talk about people being a Form 2 stylist, example Dooku, or a Form 4 stylist, example Yoda, where they've specialized in that particular way of dealing with things. But you've got to think that if those people were real at the kind of level they've achieved, they must have an understanding of the other forms, even if they don't tend to prefer it. So they may sort of default to a particular numbered form, but they must have an understanding of the other ones, in order to be able to deal with people who fight in a completely different way to the way they do.
Yeah, I mean, and and within universe, that's definitely going to be what's portrayed, I think, the most is, somebody called it like a rock paper scissors approach. This defeats this, which defeats this, which defeats this, and it goes around in a circle.
I think you actually made that analogy more than
did
once.
I?
Yeah. It's an apt analogy, because that sort of approach is very common in media, in entertainment, in games and movies and the like. But when you get down to the real world, it doesn't really apply. So until you have experience with real world martial arts, it's an easy placeholder. It's an easy way to envision what you have and what you want to do.
Right, and I think a lot of that from a film perspective comes out of like Hong Kong, those types of martial arts movies where they use these actual historical styles and everything like that, but they use the fights and the physical confrontations to further character and to kind of embody certain attributes of the people. Now, of course, to a Chinese audience or to an Asian audience, these are going to have different kind of triggers, different little touchstones. Like if you see Wong Fei Hong on screen, that's going to be different for somebody who knows who he is and somebody who doesn't. But when you kind of like translate that over into that, and then you add game mechanics in there, and since game mechanics does all kind of operate on that rock paper scissors attitude, it's very easy to get that kind of siloing and all of that. And unfortunately, it does happen in the real martial arts, especially when things. Interestingly enough, as we've stated many times, the reason we started this is because weapon combat is kind of going out of style, as it were, because we don't fight with swords anymore, and so it's it's a good way to kind of keep the art alive, as it were, and we can get into that word, all day. But and if we talk about, and I think if we use that word, art, we can really touch on one of the major aspects of form and style. Because in art, whether it be music, painting, or sculpture, you have both. And you have the same kind of dichotomy and the same kind of overlap. Right? You have somebody's style, and you have somebody's form. Right? Some forms very, very formulaic and obvious, like Rembrandt, who even had students of his produce his own paintings, all kinds of stuff like that. And then you have people who are like very, very intuitive, Van Gogh and the Impressionists, and, that kind of thing. And so you have in both of those things, you have forms that are different and you have styles that are different. And you look at those two things and you go, okay, well, this form is different and this form is different and this style is different and this style is different. And I think it's very easy for us to then conflate style and form simply because they coincidentally are exactly the same in both of these particular examples. But as we've mentioned, it's always going to change on context too. Where we get into arguments is where one person might be using the word in one way and the other person might be using it in another way. And obviously, no understanding can come from that. But anyway, thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, one thing that kind of came to my mind as you were talking about art was music. I know Eric and I both have some background in music. And so even if we had the same sheet music in front of us, him playing on a trombone is going to sound significantly different, not just because it's going to be a different instrument than me playing on bassoon, but my style of playing the bassoon and his style of playing the trombone are going to sound extremely different just because of our intonation.
True. And what would even complicate it more is if we asked a jazz musician to simply improv on the theme. So he could be technically playing the same piece and have a completely different form and style from either of you.
Yeah, can I just jump in on that actually, because just to add to the panel, I have a musical background as well in guitar. It gets even more complicated when you get 3 or 4 people from different eras playing the same instrument, playing the same music, but because of their own sort of influences of the time they grew up, their particular interpretations are different. I mean, and this leads into another thing as well. I mean, a good example being Andres Segovia, who played a lot, who premiered a lot of the repertoire that classical guitarists now play, and yet people are literally, and have done for 20 years, they line up to almost disown him and say, oh, he played it completely wrong. You don't do it like that, you do it like this. And you then get into this whole sort of critiquing people's styles and saying, well, yes, you're playing the right notes, but you're not playing them in the right way because now we think you should do it this way, which I know is something that certainly, also translates in martial arts. You do get a little bit of that going on as well.
Yes, true. And that's probably one of the best examples of when I was saying using the word in 2 different fashions. When people say something like that, you know, oh, he's playing it completely wrong, right? They're kind of critiquing something as form, right? Because they're looking at the method in which he's doing it, right? And then the defense will be, well, but it's just style, right? But they might be using the terms in the same way, meaning they're saying the same thing, right? I don't like your style, but it's just my style. And then you get butting heads that never unlock, right? So I mean, it's a very good example of how that happens. So, you know, because there is a form to things. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
And I still don't have my cricket sound effect.
Yeah, I know. We need one.
I could
Okay.
hold the microphone up to the window. I've got crickets outside right now, but
Oh, excellent. Well, okay.
That cricket last episode.
Right.
I think one of our
So,
challenges right now is that we're all pretty close in agreement on how we're defining these in our interpretation. We don't have much internal conflict on this.
Very true. Very true. But I don't know. We can still explore. I think we can explore it. So yes, why don't we open it up to the rest of the guys here, or just did you want to continue to comment on that?
No, I'm that's
Okay. All right. So, well, let's see where we should go from here. All right. Well, so yes, we've got it. So we've got form, we got style, and we understand that people are going to argue about that. And one of the things that will obviously come up, and comes up a lot on the internet and stuff like that, is somebody sees something, and very similar to your Segovia story, like, you're not doing it right, right? As my teacher used to say, the cry of, that's not the right stuff. And you hear that a lot. And I think it comes down to a form style maybe argument a lot of times. If we kind of look at things more in a stylistic kind of way, or like a performance of this as a particularly stylistic point of view, we're going to probably, I would guess, we're going to be more accepting of things that maybe don't fit within our particular expectations. So we might pay more attention to it and maybe even learn a little bit more. Now, of course, if we look at things as form, there are mechanical responsibilities that you take when you are wielding a weapon against another weapon. There are physics to take into concern. There are conditioning aspects. There are injury aspects. All of these kind of things which can be addressed in form, right? And those are interesting. I think those are far more interesting talks. I think that's where we should really talk about this stuff, is in a form, things that will be shared by everybody. And I know not everybody's going to agree on the form either, right? But if we're simply talking about form, nobody will take it personally, because it's like, well, if you can come, a good one is the high guard. You know, oh, high guard, common thing. Oh, you're completely open. Why would you ever hold your weapon above your head? And of course, anybody that's done it knows that there are definite tactical advantages to it, and all of that. But that's a form type of thing. We're dealing with kind of concrete things that can be demonstrated, things that can be tried, things that can be experimented with and experienced, right? When we're talking about style, like a Dulon or something like that, if we see a mechanical, oh, your shoulder looks out of whack in this particular move, okay. But you're moving too much meaning like you're moving around the floor too much, or you're not moving completely in a straight line, or you know, these kind of dogmatic complaints about certain things. I think kind of conflate the form and style thing, where there's a lot of things will be stylistic, as long as there's a kind of common form, which in our case it would be biomechanics. In music's case, it would be tonalities, scales, keys, that kind of thing. And then, you know, in painting, strokes, and you know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so it appears we've set a temporary pause in the connection there for Master Anonymous. Is everybody else still with us?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's interesting the point that Master Anonymous was just bringing up about, you know, critiquing form as being, you know, a technical point, like, you know, how low your stance is, or how wide it is, or, you know, the trajectory of your you know, that your weapon moves through, and those kind of things that are, you know, that you can definitely have almost a kind of black and white view of, and the kind of more stylistic things where you might get differences between the way people were taught to do certain things or the way they interpret them. You know, I mean, that's an interesting thing in itself that, you know, that the Master was just bringing up there. So it's certainly something that I think a lot of people will agree with and understand.
Excuse me there, fellas.
Welcome back, Master.
Cut me off.
Just after you were describing how form and style can be related in music and in painting, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right. I was going to demonstrate here a basic guard right here. Now we can do this with one hand or two. If I do it with one hand, it's probably going to be more equated with Makashi, Suresu, Ataru, something like that. If I put it like here, it's going to be associated probably more with Shicho, Form 5, all of that kind of thing right there. Now these are the cues that we kind of pick up on, right? There's going to be a form that's common to both of these, right? And it's obviously included in those body mechanics, like that, or like that. But you notice, same thing. Right? That's why we start with Shicho and we kind of build up onto it. So it's kind of building a form. Now, I can do this like this, and I can do this like this, right? But the precise way I do it, and when I do it in you know, kind of full speed or in practice, what I'm going to link up to, it's going to be different. All of that, how quick I am doing it, the rhythm, the meter, all of that's going to differ, which is going to translate into a style that you see. So that's kind of where I was going there before I was rudely cut off. So where were you guys now when I bashed back in?
Well, I was just sort of following up on that point that when you're looking at somebody else, you can kind of comment on their form in the sense of their technique, their depth and angle of their stances, how wide they are, that kind of thing. Same thing with the, you know, with the weapon, the sort of the angle of the guards or the trajectory the blade travels through. So it's really concrete stuff. It's kind of what you were saying before, really. It's really concrete stuff that you can look at and measure. But the style that people have and the, you know, their little eccentricities is a much harder thing to sort of deal with, because they have their own, they might have their own way of doing it, or it might just simply look different when somebody who's 200 plus pounds and 5'9" does something compared to somebody who's 130 pounds and 6'3". Those differences are harder to really get into and have anything sort of constructive to comment on, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's true, and that's what I'm, kind of going at with talking about form stuff. I'm not like when we start talking about people's styles and and how they do that, yeah, it can get a little personal, and like you said, it's not necessarily very constructive. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I'm doing it this way. As long as you're not doing something that's hurting yourself or it's, whatever. And here's another thing, too. We got to be careful when we're watching the stuff on these little computers and stuff like that, because we're getting very little information. We don't see depth in our computer screen. We can't see what the angles of these blades are, or anything really to a certain extent. And a lot of the stuff that we do is going to be, for film, is going to be shot just so you can see certain things. So when you see it in use, it's going to look entirely different if it looks like anything at all. When you get in, definitely when you get into the combat thing, people find it very, very hard to see style anymore, because it becomes very, very pragmatic at that point. Anybody have anything to add? No?
Well, can I just sort of ask something? I mean, something that seems to come up a lot when you talk about style is kind of the mixtures of forms that people put together. If you've got somebody who's studied, several of the 7 forms, for example, and then they kind of combine them in particular ways, which might be different from the way somebody else maybe combines them. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And as ways of seeing differences in style because of the approaches that people sort of prefer. You might get somebody, for example, who prefers to fight one-handed, and then somebody else who prefers to fight two-handed. And that, I mean, it would be easier to see differences in style with that, surely.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and like I said, even when you get into a real kind of fighting situation, things happen so fast and so small, it's difficult to see anything at all. But yeah, so if like you got two fencers, right? Unless you know a lot about fencing, it's probably not going. You're probably not going to be able to distinguish that type of thing. Just like people who are not into classical music could not tell the difference between. I mean, they might be able to tell the difference that they're 2 different pieces played by 2 different people, but they could never really tell them apart the way that classical music fans can, where they can hear it, pinpoint the recording and all of that. So, yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. Warnock, you got anything to add? I don't know. Well, anybody else?
Oh, 2 videos that people can watch that would really show the difference in people's style is the Makashi Dulan that Master Nero put up, and then the Makashi Dulan that you, Master Anonymous, have made. They're the same form, just very, very different styles because of your backgrounds in Chinese martial arts versus fencing.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Obviously, mine is the least, the less of the accepted.
Hello, gentlemen. Just made it back.
All right. Good. Okay, so yes, did you have anything to add on us?
No, I missed about the last 15 minutes of conversation, so I'll have to play catch up.
Okie dokie. All right, so where are we at here? I don't know. Do you guys got any questions?
Have we touched on any kind of transition? When does a new form evolve? When does a new form evolve from an old one? Does an individual person's style ever change a form enough that you have a brand new form? Have we gone into anything like that?
Yeah. Well, no, we haven't. We could definitely go right in. Do you want to start us out on that?
I was just thinking about using the 7 forms as kind of our core item here. Each one evolved out of some need from the previous form. If we look at 1 and 2, appearance-wise, they are, at least as we have interpreted them, distinctly different. So you have the foundation of Form 1, Shicho, and it has a very distinct appearance to it. And as the need evolved for something different within the context of the Star Wars universe, a new form was created. But I don't know that we have looked at or talked much about how it was created out of Form 1. Did someone take some of the elements of Form 1 and drastically alter them? What is the evolution of form to form within these? If we look historically at Eastern and Western martial arts, there's evolution comes at least in part from changes in other technology. The development of new weapons kind of drove the development of new forms of fighting styles. But here we have a weapon that's remained relatively unchanged in its context for thousands of years. And the driving force behind change was the need to adapt to what somebody else was doing differently. Where did that come from?
Right. Now, obviously, I think that they really screwed up the timeline on that one. It's way too long, right? Because what's really happening, what they're really describing is a sophistication of weapon use. You start out with Shicho, and you can see this technically in the stuff that we're putting down, because I'm trying to kind of hold to that kind of thing. It works too. It actually, historically, that's how kind of things go. You start off with a very militaristic, very simple slash and bash style, right? That's what our Shicho is, where it's for battlefield combat. You're running past people. There's lots of people around you, so you got to keep everything kind of in your view, and you got to keep moving, and usually just have to keep plowing forward. And you're going to get maybe 1, maybe 2 strikes on some guy. You're going to move to the next one because there's other people that are going to be coming in on you. And we've done a training hall episode with that particular thing. So after a while, you have the lightsaber is now invented, and that's what they're using it for. So after a certain period of time, you're going to see lightsaber to lightsaber combat start to arise, where 2 individuals are going to start using this weapon of war. And instead of just getting one opportunity to strike and maybe walking behind them, or getting behind them, or having another open target or something like that, now it's very difficult to get behind them. It's very difficult to get past them. They stay right in front of you, and they just keep moving like this. And so you're going to try to add sophistication to what's going on, right? You're going to get more parries, because if somebody's coming in with a big full amplitude side strike, they've fully committed to that, boom, they miss, or you parry it and it slides off of there, they are now committed to the rest of that arc, right, in which you can then capitalize. Sureisu Ataru is kind of then more sophistication on that, picking out certain bits, right, in our idea, defensiveness and aggressiveness. Form 5 is kind of like the synthesis of all of that, where you're taking many things and you're putting them together into a technical amalgam. And then, as I like the way Master Wheelos, Craig Page describes it, 6 and 7, respectively, are unification, 6, and transcendence, 7. So you're unifying all of your skills, and then you're transcending the lessons that you were taught, and which is common in the martial arts. This can also be a analog for personal development, and I think that's why martial arts speaks to personal development so much. Yeah. So, comments, elaborations?
No, it's a beautiful summary. It's very well said, and I think it encompasses most of what I was talking about just a minute ago.
Good. I wish I would have taken a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Could I just jump in and ask something there? Because I mean, I do find the sort of the development of each of the forms very, the kind of, in a sense, the kind of fictitious backstory in a way of how they develop kind of interesting. And Suresu Form 3 is one that's always been interesting from that point of view, because, I mean, if you take Form 2 as being a very kind of lightsaber on lightsaber dueling kind of style, but Form 3 was never really been talked about as being some kind of an answer to that, really. Wasn't it said that it was supposed to be because blasters were more sort of prevalent, so it was aimed more at defending against that rather than defending against another swordsman using Form 2?
Yes, that's definitely the conceit in the universe. There is a real world kind of explanation of it. And that's essentially, you're taking now something that went from single combat and you're bringing it back to the battlefield. And in both cases, Suresu and Ataru, these are both more expanded battlefield tactics, right? Or not just even battlefield, but multiple opponent. And it starts to widen your thing. So you're no longer just a duelist, right? You now hear. And so it's a sophistication of all of the lessons that happened in the first form, Shicho, right? You have a 360-degree awareness, right? You have to keep that up. And that's what's really started to be trained in Suresu, is to be aware of everything around you, even if you're not looking at it, using your body, perception, the position of your saber, right? How you're holding it, how it feels in your hand, where it is in relation to your body. That's what those orbits are for. All of that kind of thing, so that you can deal with all those things, whether it be blasters or anything like that. That's kind of what we're talking about. We're returning to a more, instead of a single combat thing, we're going to more group combat or a more varied combat type of scenario. And I think they get that a little bit right in the books and cartoons and stuff like that, because that is kind of what happens, right? And then it kind of progresses until that particular weapon is made obsolete, which, of course, I guess we could argue is the era, like, right after the Clone Wars. But anyway, so yeah, and then when and then Form 5, you see it's kind of, they split it up into two things, because it's almost like they couldn't choose which way do I go, One is far more battlefield tactic. One more is far more dueling, right? So Gemso versus Shen, that kind of thing.
Could I just, because I was just actually thinking ahead as you were talking there, and Form 5, and we're fortunate having yourself and Master Vornark here as well, because the Shen Gemso kind of dichotomy. I mean, would you say that could be taken as an example of different styles that draw on the same lessons?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be. I mean, that's definitely what we're talking about, and it being a synthesis.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Um, I think in some ways it's we're dealing with an artifact of the creative mind over the martial mind in how it was delineated, because it could be two separate forms, but if, in terms of putting it into the canon, they had some. I can only speculate on what their reasoning was to call it one particular form. Maybe they wanted to have an odd number of forms overall. I really don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Was it originally split in the original Fight Saber article?
My recollection is it has always been considered one form, just two different interpretations for two different scenarios.
Right, yeah, like two different aspects of it. Well, it'll be interesting. Hopefully, we can get somebody to see that. But yeah, definitely the Form 5 being split into the two is a good example of the stylistic and form dichotomy there, and it kind of causes a little bit of confusion with people. Why are they considered the same form? Why are they considered one thing instead of two? And it's really because they're all building on essentially the same building blocks, right? And that's why when I had read the Wikipedia pages and kind of figured out, and Craig Page's paper and all that kind of, it made much more sense as a progression of learning and development, which it does. The only thing that's really kind of out of whack is the timeline. But yes, so when people look at Shin and Gemso, how do we distinguish him? Right, most of the time it's just somebody goes into reverse grip, and hey, Shin. Gemso, I think, is a little more difficult to encapsulate. Obviously, I think Vornox is brilliant in that sense. Probably, I don't know of any other ones that I've seen out there. So I'd be very cool to see another type of Gemso out there. So yes, if you have one, post a video response.
Yes, please. We love input from others.
Yes. So yeah, but yeah, I think it's definitely difficult to distinguish these particular form style things, especially in Form 5. All right. So do we have anything to finish up here, guys?
Have there been any questions posted in any of the social media?
Let's see. Nothing on Facebook or anything. I don't. Whoop, wait.
I guess we've answered everybody's questions.
Yeah, maybe. Here, let me see here. I should have. Yes, I'm having a difficult time accessing the comments. So I see that we've got comments, but I can't quite access them to see what they are. So I apologize. Okay, well, so I apologize. We'll try to answer them when I can retrieve the comments when it's posted, I guess. So, unless anybody else can see them on the YouTube page or anything like that.
I'm seeing if I can load them up on my desktop on the side here.
Gotcha. Okay, so you guys got anything to add as we finish up here?
Yeah, I have a question. in regards to form versus style. When learning the material, what would be the thing to focus on if balance is not the answer? When say performing say Shichijo.
If what?
Okay, if you were to judge a student's performance, what would you look more for in what they were doing? Would it be the form or the style?
It would only be the form. That would be the only thing that I could comment on.
Okay, but would style come into play?
And I mean, I would obviously distinguish things that were elements of style versus things that were elements of form, but that's probably about it. You don't have to think about style. Style is something that just is, right? So really, you just have to. You kind of just have to go.
So I've managed to pull up a question here from the comment thread. I don't know if we'll have time to give a thorough answer, but I'll throw it in here. From Michael Redcrow. I follow Gary's point, but I think it's important to remember that it would be better to be a master of one or two styles/forms as opposed to being merely competent in 6 or 7. Do you agree with this, or what is your take on it? I believe this is a question about competence and skill in the 7 forms.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, in our system, they're all stages, so you just go through the different stages. So it's not a matter of dividing your attentions. But here's the thing too: you have to remember is that like a lot of people think that like doing another style is going to ruin a previous style that you did or whatever. No, it's just going to go into developing whatever style you have, that kind of thing. You just follow the forms and your style will come through. Sure, if there's a point where you want to kind of amalgamate things, that's great. But yeah, the idea that you're going to obviously, you don't want to take on too much at any one time, right? But if you learn something here, like if you learn basics over here, basics of this, and then basics of that, and then basics of that, you're not going to lose the basics of the one that you learned before when you learn the second one, if that makes any sense, right? So it's not like new learning negates old learning, right? Depending on how it all depends on you too. Some people do great just learning one thing, and they can take that as far as anybody else can. Other people like to learn lots and lots of things. I don't think there's any particular rule to it, and obviously you just don't progress until you're ready. You have to be patient. Patience, practice, perseverance. That's what it takes. So no matter how many styles you want to do, or how many forms, or how many this, that, or the other, right? That's one of our points here. It all ends up in the same place, and it's all based on the same thing, our human bodies. So there is going to be a form shared by anything. So it all depends. I don't think that there is a rule that we can say how many is too many or whatever. Some people, I want to learn this completely. Okay, that's great, but no one perspective is complete. That's the whole idea with perspectives. So whether you learn and train in one thing and then go experience other perspectives with that one thing, right? Or whether you experience all kinds of things and try to bring it into one thing. Either way, I don't really see a problem with it.
I imagine that probably answered the question thoroughly.
Okay. Anybody have
That's the only question that I can find on the YouTube site right now.
Gotcha. Okay then. Well, we have come to the end of the hour, so thank you for that question. It brought us right up, right up to the end here. So, from everybody here, thank you to our panel. Thank you to for tuning in tonight, and have a great holiday weekend. We know it's here in the United States. It's Memorial Day, so salute the troops and remember the fallen. And have a great weekend with friends and family. Happy sabering, and may the Force be with you.